Hello, hello. Welcome to Unlapped. I'm Nicole. That is Laurence. I do think Nate doesn't like us anymore. I think he's like really hard to find these days. He'll join us again at some point. That or he's just mad that we're beating him so soundly at our little game. Anyway, Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. So remember, if you are checking us out on YouTube, remember to subscribe to the new ESPN F1 YouTube channel. That's where you can find us all season long. Actually, you can find us there all year round, 365 days a year for all of your F1 content. If you're listening to us someplace else, cool, great. Hit us with a 5-star review. And remember that we are back every single week. God, I feel like we have a lot to talk about. We have a lot to get caught up on after like last week because just chaos. And our producers want us to start right there too. Max Verstappen. All right. The bottom line is he's actually just one penalty point away from that one race ban, which means he has to go without getting another penalty point. He has to go until the 4th of July weekend. So Silverstone. Like, what is your confidence level that he can actually do that?
He's walking a tightrope. There's no doubt about it. But I also believe that he is probably more capable than any driver of keeping on top of that tightrope. Of course, he didn't in Spain. He got the red mist and did something that he shouldn't have done. But now he knows that race ban is just hanging there, potentially could come into action if he gets just one more point. And remember, there's so many things you can get penalty points for. But I think Max will be able to keep it all under control. Remember, up to this point in this season, so the first 8 races of the year, he didn't get a single penalty point. So I think he can get through 2. The interesting thing for me after that is that actually, while 2 of his existing points expire, as you say, ahead of Silverstone, he then has to wait until after the Mexican Grand Prix. So another 10 races for another 2 to expire. So that still leaves him on the point where he'll be 3 points away. So another example of what happened in Spain over the next 11 races, and he's got the race ban as well. So it's not as simple as he gets to Silverstone and he's scot-free. He's going to have that hanging over him for a while, which is why I think the system's actually very good. It should punish drivers for issues, or for instance, like the one in Spain.
There's a lot of frustration on his part. And like you can look at it in a variety of ways. One, you can look at it that the frustration was there because of who it involved. Like obviously his BFF status with George Russell is like well documented. There's also the idea that he's like, this season isn't going well. This season hasn't been easy. He's not gone out there and won every race and dominated, and his car, it might be harder to drive than before. And then there's also the idea that like, maybe he doesn't want to be at Red Bull anymore. He's doing whatever he can to sort of just get out. So why do you think he's having the temper tantrum that he's having?
I think with Max Verstappen, he's always operating on the absolute limit in almost every sense, in the sense of the absolute limit of what the car can do, but also his frustrations as well. And he knows that he, in any other, or in a McLaren or maybe even a Mercedes, he'd be that step closer to the front of the championship. And it's this Red Bull that's holding him back. So he has that in his mind throughout. He's made that very clear that this car is incredibly difficult to drive on the limit. It does have peak performance, but getting there is again just so difficult all the time. And then to have a situation like it played out in Spain, where all of a sudden circumstances are all working against you. You've been put on the wrong tyre. It turned out it was the only tyre that Red Bull had left to put him on after the safety car. You've then got Charles Leclerc coming past you, banging wheels with you. George Russell trying to get past you, banging wheels with you. And all of that, just kind of this guy who's already on the limit of just trying to get everything he can out of the performance of the car. I think that's what tipped him over. I wouldn't, I don't think he's kind of crumbled under the pressure or anything like that. I think it's purely that he just operates right on the limit all the time and can so easily just be nudged over it when he's in those real wheel-to-wheel situations.
Yeah, I don't like the concept too that he's like crumbling under the pressure of having real competition, because he didn't crumble under the pressure when Lewis Hamilton was like race in, race out. Like it's not like this is like a new thing for him. Like it has happened before. But I do think when, as you said, like he is sort of like constantly fighting to get the most out of it, like you get frustrated after a while, and it doesn't take much to just like finally piss you off. And I think that a little bit that's what happened. And I think a little bit too was the fact that like, hey, it did involve George Russell. Like that's sort of like the last little like thing to like push him over the edge. There is that conspiracy theory though, that there is a clause in his contract that could allow him to leave Red Bull if he's outside the top four by the Austrian Grand Prix. So like the conspiracy theory would be like maybe he's just tanking to be put in that position. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't agree with that because that would require some premeditation, and I don't think that the
Yes.
incident with Russell was in any way premeditated. I think it was purely just a rush of blood to the head in that moment, frustration that had built up through that race. And if you looked at how he driven for the previous 60 laps, he'd been doing a remarkable job in a car that arguably shouldn't have been putting McLaren under pressure. Yet on a 3-stop
Yep.
strategy, he was able to do that. So everything he does, I think, with Max is to get the absolute maximum out of it. But Nate did text me after the race when we heard about these 3 penalty points that Max had been given and said, wouldn't it be ironic that that is actually the thing that pushes him out of this or gives him that clause to get out of this Red Bull contract if he ends up, say, missing the British Grand Prix? Because we actually believe that the clause in the contract is not for the Austrian Grand Prix, but for the summer break. So after the Hungarian Grand Prix, so actually a little bit longer for him to potentially fall out of that top four. So let's imagine a situation where he does have to miss a race because he hits that 12 penalty points and therefore drops behind. But look, I mean, to suggest that he's doing it on purpose in any way, I think is actually quite unfair on Max Verstappen, because if there's any driver that gets in the car and absolutely gives it everything every weekend, then Max is the guy. And really, if he does want out of that Red Bull contract, okay, that clause is probably the most seamless way out. It's probably the most cost effective for him, because I imagine there'd be other penalties that he would have to pay if he just bought his way out of the contract. But if he really wants out of it, I think he's going. I don't think Red Bull are going to be able to hold on to him. They've hinted at this before, and it was a similar situation with Adrian Newey. What's the point in holding on to a driver who just doesn't want to be there anymore? It's just creating issues within the team. So I think if Max really wants to go, then he'll find his own way out. I don't think he needs to tank. And I think he's absolutely giving it everything every weekend at the moment.
I did think it was interesting though, like his mindset, because like after the race, he was asked about competing for the championship, because actually he was asked specifically about what happened with George, and he was like, "I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about what happened in the entire race." And they were like, "Well, what happened with George could affect your ability to fight for a driver's championship." And he was like, "I can't fight for a driver's championship anyway." Well, that's not necessarily true. Like he's really not that far out of it. So like I guess I was just trying to figure out like how did he go from one extreme to the other? And is it just like frustration, or is that actually how he feels?
Does he actually feel that he can't fight for a championship?
Yeah.
I think, I
He's
think
like kind of
when,
there.
yeah, I know, I agree. And if you look at it, he's 49 points behind. That's a lot, but there's still 15 races to run. And, if you do the maths on that, he has to basically outscore Oscar Piastri by about 3.2 points every race on average to get there. So that is doable for Max, especially when you think you just go back 2 races. In Imola, that car was the best racing car on the track. He didn't
Exactly.
take pole position, but he got the lead in the first corner. And from that point onwards, he was the best or the fastest car out there. So, I think with Max, it is a sense that sometimes when he's in a race weekend and everything isn't going the way he wants, because he is operating on this limit, he does either do things or say things which are at the extreme end of where they should be, or of what reality is in terms of his views on the championship. So I think he will continue to fight absolutely for it at every race. And the other thing is, if you look at the races coming up, Canada, Austria, Silverstone, those are all circuits where potentially the Red Bull could be a bit closer. We might not get the exceedingly hot temperatures we saw in Spain, which seemed to play towards McLaren. So I think the whole situation could look quite different in 3 races' time. I think in the case of Spain, after what had just happened on track, Max, I wouldn't really, judge him on anything he said after the race. I mean,
No.
even his whole perception on the incident itself changed by Monday when he didn't quite apologize, but he admitted it was his fault. And
Right.
so, I think when the drivers are speaking after a race, it's sometimes when we get the best quotes. It's sometimes when we see the raw emotion of the drivers, and we do want to see that. But I don't think it's always a true insight into exactly what they're thinking about the wider championship situation or something like that.
It's very heat of the moment. All right, our producers are obviously pushing us because they have the little bar off at the bottom of the screen there, and it says like, is Max versus George one of the best rivalries in Formula One? And like, this is a sport that goes back 75 years. There have been some really epic rivalries, and I think of like, Max and Lewis just a couple of years ago, almost being better than what we have now. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think it has the potential to. I think for it to be one of the best in the history of the sport, a championship would have to be on
George
the
has to
line.
be better.
And yeah, I
Yes.
mean, George and Mercedes have to be in a better position. But in terms of petty rivalries, as in like kind of a word here, a dig there, I think it's one of the best I've had for a few years. But what went
Yes.
through my mind, my question back to you is, if it had been a different driver that had touched Max in turn one, forced him wide, and then a different driver that he'd been told to give the position back to, let's say it had been, I don't know, Alex Albon rather than George Russell, would Max have acted in the same way? Would he have driven into the side of George?
So I wonder a little bit like, okay, so Albon is a former teammate. So like, I think like maybe that could have also rubbed him the wrong way. But let's say it was, I don't know, Antonelli instead of Russell. I
Sure.
don't know. I don't know. I do feel like there was a little bit of like a tipping point for him where he was like, no, not that guy. That was like the last, that was like his, sort of like his last straw. So I do think that that's part of it. And I do think that if they had to all go out to dinner this weekend, we'd get that picture where like one is sitting at one
Yeah.
end of the room and one is sitting at the other end of the room. And they'd be like, no, they didn't talk. So I do think that that is part of it. Um, Let me ask this because we obviously we're sort of circling around Mercedes. It's been a rough couple of weeks for Mercedes because of the engine. Like they've had issues. Like how much concern is there going forward with just given what we've seen the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, and it's particularly surprising because remember, we're getting rid of these
Hmm.
engines at the end of this year. So at this stage of an engine's development, it shouldn't be having problems week to week. And of course, George Russell had that issue in qualifying in Monaco on a weekend when it looked like he was, a top five contender. And then the engine just cut out. I think it was in Q2, and he had to start way back down the grid. And then, of course, couldn't recover because it was Monaco. And then to have Kimi Antonelli's engine let go in Spain and cost the team more points. It is surprising. And there was Fernando Alonso's Mercedes engine in the back of the Aston Martin
That's
that
right.
also let go in Monaco. So it is strange, and it shouldn't be happening. And also, Mercedes are an engine provider that kind of pride themselves on the reliability. I don't think they've always had the most out and out powerful engine, but the reliability is something which they've been able uh, to be able to point to as a real strength. So yeah, it's strange and it is concerning. I guess the only thing is that at the moment there's not a huge amount they're fighting for. They've actually just lost second place in the constructors' championship to Ferrari, but that battle is so tight. I feel like they could easily get that back. And also for these teams, second or third or fourth, it's not the be all and end all for these teams. Yes, there's money involved in it, but also actually the further you finish down the order, the more wind tunnel time you get for the following year. So there's kind of pluses and minuses of finishing there. But certainly it's something that if it's anything to do with the manufacturing side, or kind of just processes that they have, they absolutely want to make sure that's fixed, understood. But as is so often the case in Formula One, something goes wrong and they learn X amount of lessons more, and in fact, the engine becomes stronger than ever before.
So, because that's actually what I was thinking when you were talking about it. Like, yes, this is the last year of the current spec. Is there anything that they're potentially doing to like maybe get a jump on next year? That maybe some of the reliability issues is actually more of that and less of an actual reliability issue?
Well, I imagine, yeah, the focus in terms of development is solely on 26 and has been for some time.
Right.
But you still got to manufacture the engines. Of course, Mercedes manufacture probably, I think, more than any other team in Formula One because they have more customers. Alpine are going to join next year. They're going to lose Aston Martin, but it's always been the case that they produce more. Usually that's an advantage because you have basically more sample sets of data coming back to you as well, and potentially more issues get flushed out that way. So it is surprising. I wouldn't have thought though that the emphasis on development would impact the manufacturing process for this engine. And as I said, it should be so well developed now that there shouldn't really be any reliability issues. It'll be frustrating for them to some extent though, because of course, if there are reliability issues, they need to address them, and they need to come up with fixes. And because you're actually still allowed to do that with the 2025 engines, that might actually take away a little bit of brain power or computing power or dyno time that you might have wanted to put towards 26. So certainly not ideal, but I don't think I wouldn't say 26 is going to have a negative effect on your reliability for 25. It shouldn't do anyway at this stage.
I'm just trying to assign logic to something that doesn't really have a logical explanation.
Completely understand. Yeah, no, I agree.
So yeah. So I feel like, we spent so much of the beginning part of the season when we were talking about Mercedes, talking about like how impressive Kimi Antonelli has been. And I feel like it was Nate who pointed out a lot that the sort of going into the season, sort of the story around Kimi had been, he's going to have these great moments, but then he's also going to have moments where you're like, yep, he's a rookie. And in the last couple of weeks, I think we've seen some rookie issues, but then obviously in Spain that wasn't on him. But we're seeing a little bit of it's like it can't always be just like this up, like rookie, just rocket ship kind of thing. Except with, I don't know, Isaac Hadjar. Lately, Hadjar has been doing so much with arguably so little. Do you think what he's doing to this point is actually more impressive than what Kimi has done so far?
Yeah, I think what's been most impressive about Harvard's season is that it has been that constant progress. You think back to Australia and spinning on the formation lap and everything that went with that.
Like the
And to now,
lowest of absolute lows.
yeah, exactly. But now we just came out of a triple header and he scored points at every race. He finished sixth at Monaco. His first Monaco Grand Prix, took sixth place. That's old school points from when I was a kid. You used to get points from first to sixth. That's a seriously good result.
Yeah.
And then seventh again in Spain. The only caveat I might have is that perhaps that Racing Bulls is a better car than a lot of people give it credit for. Of course, it is the junior team at Red Bull, and therefore I think there's this assumption that it's a kind of bottom 10 car. But that car is actually pretty good. And then, of course, the best way we can judge any driver, be it rookie or kind of 5 years into their career, is how they're performing against their teammate. And I think Hadjar going up against Liam Lawson, Lawson has had an awful season in which he started at Red Bull, has been demoted, confidence through the floor, and I think probably not operating even at his best level, and I'm not entirely sure where his best level is anyway. And so perhaps there you could kind of give a bit of context to Hadjar's success, but I don't want to take anything away from him because what he's done as a rookie is impressive, and now to have that consistency there as well, which is the thing that Antonelli at the moment is lacking. Antonelli had that incident in qualifying in Monaco, for example, where he put himself out in Q2 by clipping the barrier. Antonelli's highs are undoubtedly very high. The Miami sprint pole was remarkable. Circuit had never seen before. One practice session, stick it on sprint pole. That is, real kind of top level stuff to the point that you think, okay, this guy's going to be fantastic once he gets it all together. But it's also possible to have two rookies, really doing remarkably well. And I think in Hadjar we have a real star future. My hope here, and I don't know your feeling on this, is that he doesn't go the way of so many other Red Bull rookies, and they rush him through the system, and they look at Yuki not performing, and they think, well, Isaac's doing great, lob him in the seat. Because my opinion there would be that would be too much for him at this stage. I don't know how you feel about that.
I do. I think the memes out this week where it was like Hadjar hiding under a desk because he was like,
Yes.
Yuki's not performing. No, don't pick me. Like I have had that thought, and it's like I think you and I both expected so much more out of Yuki. But I think all that he has done is prove either how undrivable that car is or how on the edge it is. And it has also it has also made me, I think, look at Max a different way. Like there was an onboard camera of him in Spain during qualifying, and I'm like, he should just not be able to do the things that he's doing. He can drive a car that is so on edge that it looks like it should be swapping ends almost every corner. And so while the second Red Bull continues to just be like the struggle bus, it has made me appreciate Mac's talent even more. But then it's also wanted me like to put like a barrier around anyone in like the baby bulls to be like, nope, don't rush them. Let's just keep them safe for a little bit longer until you get your other car together. That's that sort of thing. So I feel like you look at both of those rookies and you're like, yes, the future is bright. The future is brighter for Kimi because I feel like his path seems a little safer than it does for Isaac. Because if you throw Isaac, I think, to the Wolves too much too soon, you're going to have a Liam Lawson situation. You're going to have a, Sergio Perez situation. Like it's just not great. It is time now for the stat of the week, my friend, and it is brought to you by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Oscar Piastri has 5 wins this season. It's already the most in a season by a McLaren driver since Lewis Hamilton, which was back in 2008. That was the year that he won the Drivers' Championship. And Piastri still has 15 races to go. For the record, the most wins by a McLaren driver by season in the last 20 years, it was Kimi Räikkönen at 7 back in 2005. And then the year that Lewis won the championship in 2008, he won 5. So he's already there with Oscar. When you look at the two McLaren drivers right now, when you look at Oscar and you look at Lando, who is proving themselves to be the better driver in 2025?
I think you have to say Oscar, very much because of the stat you just read out. Of course, Lando Norris has 2 wins to Oscar's 5. But it's interesting because even so, they're separated by 10 points. And actually, if you look at the recent triple header, over the course of that, Lando Norris outscored Oscar Piastri. So it's not quite as one way as it seems when you look at just the win count. But I think Oscar Piastri, you just have so much more confidence in him going into a race weekend.
Mm-hmm.
We both picked him correctly, I would say, as our winner for the Spanish Grand Prix ahead of Lando Norris. And it's just so hard not to feel that way going into a race weekend. You have to almost trick yourself into thinking maybe this can be Lando's one, or you look for reasons why this could be Lando's weekend. Whereas Oscar, it's just that calmness. I think, that's the one trait that is perhaps most impressive in a 22-year-old, 23-year-old, certainly someone who's still very young, third season in the sport, that calmness. And then to be able to match that with, consistent results is super impressive. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I struggle for anyone apart from maybe Lando's parents and his manager to turn around and say Lando's having definitely the better season of the two, because Oscar Piastri's just been so impressive.
You just have to look at the results. Like I totally agree with you. I go into every race weekend and think, okay, it's Oscar's to lose. So like if Oscar makes a mistake in qualifying, if Oscar makes a mistake, going into turn 1, if Oscar makes a mistake anywhere else, it's his to lose. And somebody else has to go and get it if they're to win it. So, like, for that reason already, and I think I felt this way almost going into Miami, that if you had asked me right now who is going to win the Drivers' Championship, I think going into Miami, I would have absolutely said Oscar. And despite the fact that Lando got the win in Monaco, even with that, I was still like, this is Oscar's championship to lose. Do you feel the same way? Or do you think that there's enough sort of like competition there within the McLarens where this could go either way?
No, I think it is Oscar's to lose. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a too strong a statement, but certainly Oscar is the favourite. I kept saying up until I think prior to this most recent race, maybe that Max Verstappen was still the guy I was sticking with for the championship. He's made it very hard now for me to maintain that. But as we were talking about earlier, he can't be ruled out. Yeah. I kept saying Max, and then he goes and does something like Spain and throws away so many points. I mean, even if he finished that race, in 5th place, it would have been another 9 points that could prove very useful at the end of the year. However, but back to the McLaren drivers. I mean, the way things are going, you've got to say Oscar. But because there has been that ebb and flow, there has been certain races where It's not always been ones where McLaren's won. It's sometimes been those ones where Max has had the upper hand and Lando has somehow managed to finish ahead. And actually, if you look at Oscar's season, and probably the main reason why Lando has stayed in touch, it was because he made that big mistake in Australia and only came away from that race with 2 points because he ran wide in the rain. Of course, Lando also ran wide in the rain at exactly the same point, but managed to salvage it and still win the race. So I think it's going to be incidents like that will ultimately decide this championship, because I think you go into each race and, like I said, I think Piastri is usually the favourite, but there's always a chance Lando can sneak a victory here and there. And as long as he can keep that, he'll stay in there. Where one of them could really throw away the championship, and it really is theirs to lose, will be on those incidents where they crash out completely, come home with 0 points, a bit like Max's situation in Spain where he got 1 point. Those are the ones that are going to decide the championship ultimately, because if everything goes right, those two cars should be on the podium. In many cases, they're going to be 1, 2. It just depends on the order. So, cutting out mistakes completely. But then, again, if I use that as my barometer of who's going to win the championship by the end of it, I'd still go with Oscar, because he's been that calmness, that ability to get the job done. So, I can't help but talk myself into Oscar Piastri at the moment, even though I was so strong on Max for so long.
But there's also the fact that Oscar has the lead, so there has to be a desperate. He doesn't have to do anything. If he just continues doing what he's doing, he's fine. So somebody else has to do something to snatch it away from him. And I think that that's a little bit part of why no, I'm just going to continue to ride the Oscar train. I am in the camp of Zach Brown, who said, I forget, a couple weeks ago, he was like, it's probably inevitable or an unrealistic expectation to say that those two are not going to get in it with each other at some point this season. And that does go, I think, to what you're talking about, where it's that's minimizing mistakes. So if they do have an incident, say in turn 1, let's just go with Montreal because that's next. Let's say they do have an incident in turn 1 and one can continue on and the other one can't. That's huge. But I am in the camp where it is going to happen. It's going to create drama with a McLaren. At some point, somebody's going to have to step in. So I do think that the rivalry between the teammates is really in its infancy stages, because I think we're going to see a lot more from them as the season progresses, particularly when and if those things start to happen.
I completely agree. And at the moment, I agree that they're so acutely aware at this stage that they can't give away points, and also of the advantage that McLaren have at this stage, that you do see them sometimes being a bit conservative. So perfect example was Lando Norris versus Max Verstappen, first corner in Spain. He didn't really fight for that position more than he had to, because I think he knew his car had the performance to beat Max over the rest of that race. And he was right. And then, he did try and push towards Oscar, but Oscar always had answers. So at this stage, I don't think we're going to see it, unless it's just one of those happenstances where they're both, are going for the same part of track at the same time. But right now, I think they'll both back out. Where it will change is when we'll get to either a point that, say, Oscar has maybe a 25-point lead over Lando, and Lando is starting to be in a position where he has nothing to lose. Then I think we'll see some slightly more aggressive driving. Or, we just get to a position where we're kind of 5-6 races from the end of the year and they're still really close. And all of a sudden, every single point matters that little bit more. It's that little bit more important just to get ahead and have that comfort. Then I think we're going to see drivers, those two drivers, Lando and Oscar, start to take riskier moves. But it's amazing at the moment. And it's actually something that Lando talked about when I did an interview with him ahead of Monaco, is how he's in championship mindset at the moment. So it's so different to how he's been other years in F1, where you're just trying to maximize every result. McLaren a few years ago, if a podium was on the line, give it everything, take every risk, put 99% on the line, maybe even 100%, because it's your one chance to get a podium that season. Completely different now. Now it's even if you don't win this race, you might win the next 2, and then you're back to a good position. So I think once we get to the business end of the season, last kind of 5-6 races, that's when you're going to see that stuff. And it's almost inevitable, because it almost always happens with teammates when they're both fighting for the championship.
I do think that Lando does need to take a few more risks. Like when he was, maybe not when he was, well, okay, so when this happened in Spain, this was my thought process. He backed out and he let Max have the corner and he played it safe. The problem is when you play it safe with Max, you then fall behind and you have to work to get around Max. All the while, Oscar is just going out and creating a lead and then just creating a gap that you then either have to sit behind because no one's going to come on and be like, you guys have to swap, or you're going to have to like then chase him down and essentially like you're letting him build a lead, which is essentially what you're doing in the championship too. Every time you're not aggressive and every time you don't push him, you are letting him build a lead, which is exactly what he has in the championship. And it makes it a hell of a lot harder for the team to support you if you keep letting the other guy build the lead. We talked about this briefly and you kind of alluded to it a second ago. We did have some changes in Spain where the front wing regulations changed. Going into it, there had been the idea that the new regulations were going to hurt McLaren. Should we laugh at that now? Because
Well,
they didn't
we'll
seem
never.
to be hurt. They still
We'll,
seemed
we'll,
okay.
they did still seem okay, and certainly it didn't have this huge impact that I think some people were hoping for. Perhaps when it was first announced at the start of the year, some people felt they needed. And yeah, I think the reason for that is because actually there was quite a long run up to this. 9 races in which to get everything sorted and bring it to the car. It's not like it was an instant change and therefore, any flaws or fundamental issues with the car would be exposed straight away. So I think that's part of the reason why we didn't see a major shakeup. But we will never know, because if they'd run with the previous front wings, perhaps McLaren would have won by a minute or something like that, 50 seconds. We've seen huge winning margins for dominant cars like that before. So I guess we'll never know entirely, but certainly in terms of it having a season define or it being a season defining moment, it's not that. I think, in reality, McLaren, I think they turned up with an extra stay between 2 of the flaps on the wing, and that was enough for them to pass the test. So I don't think it had the impact on McLaren that perhaps Red Bull were hoping for, maybe Ferrari were hoping for. Fred Vasseur said before when we were in Monaco, so before Spain, that he thought it could be this major moment for all teams. And I don't think it was. But the other thing you got to remember is that it's the same for everyone. It's the same for every team. So it impacts every team in the same way. They all had to give up perhaps a little bit of performance, but a lot of teams actually brought a whole new front wing concept and thereby, gained a bit of performance through that. So they were so aware of this for so early on. They were so able to plan that any performance lost could either be recovered through just developing a slightly different front wing, or it could at least be mitigated and the loss would be minimal. So I think that's why we ended up with a very similar race to all the others we've seen this season.
Okay, so listen, you and I picked the exact same podium last week.
We were so close as well. So close.
But it wouldn't have mattered because we picked the same podium. So
Yeah.
I still have a lead. We don't have to make picks again this week because we don't go to Montreal until next week, so we can revisit that later. But you and I need to figure out a way to get away from each other.
Okay.
We're at this point, we're sharing the same brain. Enjoy your weekend off.
Thank you very much.
Because
You
you
too.
don't have to do anything. And then we will talk next week as we look ahead to the race in Montreal. Remember, leave us a comment, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the new ESPN F1 YouTube channel. And obviously hit us up with a 5-star review. Plus, remember, Unlapped is presented by Oracle. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/unlapped. Until next week, guys. Bye.
Goodbye.